Dave, and I like software. That's about it. Okay, so this is what everybody was saying would happen to the mainframe. I'm sure you thought so too. But what actually happened was a little different. You could say a funny thing happened on the way to the cemetery. Somebody started to make them smart. And it was IBM, actually. And they started to make mainframes smart again around 2000. And they've been working on it a while. So the mainframe is not dead. So I thought we would cover a few things about that. And we can skip them if they're skip topics if you're not too interested. But I have a little bit prepared on these topics. So I thought we'd go through these mysterious mainframe. People who have worked on other systems and who are approaching the mainframe for the first time often find the system confusing, or at least not quite what they expected. So let's get a sense of why. Mainframe modernization. Modernization is a big thing for IBM just now, both in the engineering space and in marketing. So let's see what they're doing to modernize this platform. New development tools. There's a lot happening in the area of development tools for mainframe programming. So we'll take a look at what programmers have had to deal with traditionally, and then see a few of the current development tools. Advanced technology and traditional development practices. While the mainframe hardware has undergone amazing advances, most mainframe programmers still apply 20th century working methods, and tool vendors have not built support for contemporary good practices into the new development tools. Let's have a closer look at this. And then unit testing with Cobol check. Testing on the mainframe is well covered up and down the canonical test automation pyramid, or triangle if you prefer, except the base, fine-grained unit testing or micro testing. So let's check out a relatively new open source project that aims to fill the gap. Okay, mysterious mainframe. At first glance, mainframes appear to be a little more complicated than your Windows, Mac, or Linux laptop. That's because they are. When you ask people to explain a little something about mainframes, you might get ambiguous, overlapping, or contradictory answers. A question that would be straightforward with respect to a typical server is not so easy to answer with respect to a mainframe, because in some ways they are multiple servers in one. To understand why mainframes are so complicated and confusing, we need to travel back in time to the 1960s. In those days, when a company needed to improve their computing capability, they had to buy an entirely different computer than their old one. There was no upgrading. Besides that, every computer had its own operating system, programming languages, and third-party packages. That meant a company not only had to replace their hardware, but all their applications too. The 1960s were a time of intense competition in the business computing space. IBM was by no means the only player in that market, so they had to innovate and get new products to market quickly. On April 7th, 1964, that'll be on the test, by the way, they announced 5 models of the System 360, spanning a wide range of capacity and speed and prices. This platform is the direct ancestor of today's mainframe systems. The System 360 ran on integrated circuits instead of discrete transistors, could run more than one program at a time through time slicing, and after a couple of releases, it supported virtual storage, or what we would probably call virtual memory. But the single most significant design goal of System 360 may have been backward compatibility. Thanks to backward compatibility, a program compiled on an original System 360 can run unchanged on today's IBM Z systems. Backward compatibility is, in my opinion, the main reason for the mainframe's longevity. Over time, companies built up their portfolio of applications without having to replace them every few years. Many of these applications became mission critical and core to the company's operations. In the late 1980s and early 1990s, when people were saying the mainframe was dying, companies attempted to move their key applications to other platforms with very limited success. It proved to be too expensive to replace these applications, in part because some of them were so old that no one remembered exactly how they worked. While everyone else was saying the mainframe was dead, IBM initiated a serious push to modernize the platform starting around the year 2000. They had already been adding new innovations to the system year by year, always taking care not to break anything that was working before. That's the main reason for the system's general complexity. Everything old still has to work without modification, while they add support for everything new that comes along. That's why it has multiple addressing modes, multiple instruction sets, and multiple layers of software abstraction between object code and hardware. That's why it can be partitioned into 30 or so logical partitions, or LPARs, and combined into a parallel sysplex environment with up to 32 mainframes effectively operating as a coordinated set of servers. That's why it's hard to answer simple questions like, how does it manage memory? What's the instruction set? What's the character encoding scheme? What's the file system? IBM was having a hard time getting people to see the mainframe as anything other than a legacy platform. So they started to present the system in two ways to address two different markets. What is essentially the same hardware is sold either as IBM Z or as Linux 1. This seems to be easier for people to understand, but actually a Z system can do it all at the same time. Here's a simplified view of an IBM Z system. At the bottom, there are two photos of IBM Z machines. This is to suggest that there are multiple models to address different customer needs and budgets. The more expensive and more capable models have all the instructions implemented in hardware, and they have other hardware optimizations too. To hold down costs, smaller versions of the mainframe implement only the core instructions in hardware. So to ensure all the software can run on all the machines, there's a layer of code called microcode that knows which instructions are implemented in hardware and which ones it has to emulate. Those colored rectangles at the top of the figure represent operating systems. Of course, different object code applies to different operating systems. So there's another layer of software abstraction called millicode that translates between the object code for each OS and the underlying logical machine architecture exposed by the microcode. The microcode layer enables the same instructions to work on different models of the Z machines. The millicode layer enables the Z machine architecture to support different operating systems that have different instruction sets, memory models, and so forth. The four operating systems on the left are the evolved versions of traditional operating systems that began life in the 1960s and 70s. ZOS is the flagship operating system. It's the evolved form of OS 360, the original OS for the largest mainframe systems. It also manages the whole machine and the whole sysplex environment. Although it isn't Unix, ZOS incorporates POSIX-compliant Unix functionality. That's another aspect that can be confusing. ZTPF is the involved form of Sabre, also known as ACP, or Airline Control Program. It's the backend that processes your airline ticket reservations and other transactions, primarily in the hospitality and travel industry. ZVSE is the evolved form of DOS, not the DOS on your old PC, but the mainframe one, used on mid-size mainframes for smaller customers like the 4300 series. ZVM is the evolved form of VMCMS, possibly the first virtualization system, which was originally used to host OS and DOS operating systems on the same machine concurrently. The two operating systems shown on the right are IBM's basis for offering the mainframe as a cloud platform. As far as your application code can tell, they are the same as any other Linux and KVM environments running outside a mainframe computer room. No, I'm not getting my slide to change. Okay. So what's Linux 1 then? Isn't it just the Linux parts of the IBM Z? Yes, but customers don't seem to get that. They can understand either a legacy platform or a cloud platform, but not both in the same box. It's just too much of a stretch. So a Linux 1 customer gets a Z system that's tweaked, so it doesn't run the legacy operating systems. They can devote all the available system resources to the cloud infrastructure. You might wonder how a mainframe can be a cloud platform. Any cloud infrastructure supports a number of services or facilities, including at least the ones shown here. It turns out that in order to support the workloads that mainframes have been supporting all these years, they needed pretty much the same set of services and facilities. It didn't take much for IBM to extend the existing capabilities of the Z platform to encompass everything needed in a robust cloud infrastructure. Some IBM customers have no mainframe legacy and others do. Some have a need to support services, but not necessarily a full-blown cloud infrastructure. You can configure a mainframe system to accommodate all these needs. Today, we're mainly interested in the existing applications and mainframe assets that run 80% of the global economy. That seems to be kind of important to some people. So we'll set aside the Linux and KVM environments for now, as well as the ZTPF environment, ZVSE, and ZVM. As the older generation of mainframers retires and companies hire younger developers to support their legacy applications, they're talking about the ZOS environment. That means there's a convergence happening between two developer communities, mainframers and everyone else. And everyone else has been busy improving the way they work, discovering and learning new techniques for software development, testing, and support. And we've become accustomed to development tools that support these ways of working. Let's take a look at what a mainframe programmer sees when they log into a mainframe system. We'll just look at screenshots because you just never know if your connection will work or if there'll be some other sort of problem showing a live system in a demo. The basic interface to the system is TSO, or time sharing option. TSO is a line at a time text interface. Well, that's not terribly convenient. So IBM soon developed a full screen interface. It's called the Interactive System Productivity Facility, or Ispf. Assuming you're already logged in, the first thing you see is the Ispf primary menu. The organization can modify the look of the menu somewhat, but this is approximately what you'll see. You select options by entering their number or the abbreviations for the other functions shown at the bottom. Here's a screenshot of the dataset utility panel, which you can get to through the primary option menu. It's just one of the options. Using this panel, you can manage datasets. Dataset is the mainframe name for a file. You can do the same things using JCL, or job control language, by running batch jobs. So with this screen, you can create, that is, allocate, rename, delete, catalog, or uncatalog a dataset. And don't worry about exactly what all those mean. It has to do with the way ZOS manages datasets. So people use the words dataset and file interchangeably now. They basically mean the same thing. In this example, the user has entered A for allocate and a name for the new dataset. The next step is to fill in a form with the characteristics of the new dataset. This one is a sequential dataset with a fixed record length of 80 bytes and a block size of 800 bytes. You can also do this with JCL, executing an IBM utility program. One difference on this platform is that you have to tell the system how much space to allocate for a dataset and how much space to allocate to extend the dataset when the primary allocation is full. We don't have to do that explicitly on other systems. Here's what the TSO Ispf text editor looks like. It's not a bad editor, but it lacks the features of a contemporary smart editor or an IDE. Those numbers along the left-hand side are line numbers. You can type editor commands over those numbers to do things like moving, copying, deleting, and inserting lines. Can we offer a better interface for developers? Yes, we can. Several development stacks are available for working on mainframe applications. The links on the slides will take you to videos about each of these. And I'm going to send out a document over to Norman after this, and it'll have the slides and all the links will work. So you can go look at the videos if you want. There are more links at the end of the deck too. So the first four of these are commercial products, all of which are based on the Eclipse IDE, enhanced by plugins that support interaction with the ZOS system and editing of traditional mainframe languages. The commercial products also communicate with each vendor's mainframe hosted tooling to support testing, profiling, debugging, and other functions on the platform. The last one is an open source environment based on VS Code, which is mainly supported by Microsoft, the IBM Z Open Editor, mainly supported by IBM, and Zoe Explorer, a smart front end for TSO and Ispf, mainly supported by Broadcom. It's a great example of cooperation between for-profit corporations and the open source community. All these tools are broadly similar from the perspective of a user, or that is a developer. They provide editors with syntax highlighting, some level of auto-completion, help with locating where elements are defined and used, and some ability to recognize problems like unreachable code or syntax errors. They also know how to transfer files back and forth between your workstation and the ZOS system, and they make it easy to submit batch jobs and view their output. These tools also include a terminal emulator integrated with the IDE or editor. Some of them also include testing and debugging support for batch and CICS applications. Bear in mind, mainframe shops are not open. Mainframes are mainly used by organizations that have significant security needs and usually operate in regulated industries or in government. That means you can't pick which of these stacks you want to use. You have to use the one your employer or client uses. All of them involve components installed on ZOS and components installed on your workstation. It isn't a question of picking a tool and downloading it. So in the course of your career, you might use more than one of these, and you might have to set up your own stack out of separate pieces. This may change from job to job or from contract to contract. Any of these environments would provide a better developer experience than plain vanilla TSO and Ispf, but they're not really complete development environments. They're more like front ends for accessing TSO and Ispf. On the slide, I use the word just, but it's not meant to diminish the value of the tools. I only mean to clarify that none of these stacks will give you an independent development environment. They don't include compilers or an assembler. They're designed with the expectation that you will maintain a connection with the mainframe throughout your working session, and you will not work independently on your workstation without connecting to the mainframe. So they will delete the local copies of your source files and JCL files whenever you disconnect. If you want to keep those files to continue working locally, you must remember to copy them to a directory that you control before you disconnect. The next time you connect, let the tool download the same files again, and then copy your locally modified versions over them in the tool's working directory. One bit of good news is that mainframe shops have started to move to contemporary version control systems like Git or Mercurial, rather than the traditional ones like CA Endeavor or Serena Changeman. That gives you another practical way to manage your files between the host system and your workstation. To roll your own environment, you'll need the items listed on the slide here. Other than the VPN, you can use pretty much any software. Mainframe shops usually want people to use a specific VPN. You also must have the appropriate access rights to the ZOS system. It isn't an either-or decision. You can have a local environment that includes a compiler and use it in conjunction with one of the sophisticated front ends for TSO and Ispf. In that case, you don't need to set up all the various pieces of software yourself, just the pieces that are missing from the front-end packages. That basically means adding a Cobol compiler to the setup. You would also have to add unit testing support using a tool like Cobalt check, which we will look at in a couple of minutes. IBM offers a product called the IBM Z Development and Test Environment, or ZD&T. This is a scaled down version of a ZOS environment that runs on commodity Intel hardware under Red Hat Enterprise Linux or Ubuntu. ZD&T gives you a way to do mainframe development and testing without a live connection to a mainframe system. This doesn't look and feel like an IDE. It mimics the ZOS environment, and the starting price is $5,380 per person per year. So this is not something you're going to download and play with. This would be something that your employer or client would want you to use, and they would pay for that. Okay, so let's look at one of the developer stacks. This is the open source one, the screenshot anyway. It's based on VS Code plus IBM Z Open Editor, the VS Code extension, and the Zoe Explorer extension. And the Zoe project has a number of sub-projects, different optional components that you can also add to this, depending on what kind of work you need to do on the mainframe. So all of these tools, like this one, they ask you to set up a profile that contains your mainframe logon credentials and to define filters for selecting data sets to download and work on. So this screenshot was taken after I used my user ID as a filter to select all the Cobol source files assigned to me as part of the Cobol course that is offered jointly by IBM, Coursera, and the Open Mainframe project. In case you hadn't guessed already, I appreciate this sort of joint effort that crosses boundaries between for-profit companies and the open source community. Anyway, on the left, you can see the list of files that have been downloaded. They're organized by type. So under z whatever.cbl, you see all the Cobol source files. And under z whatever.jcl, you see all the JCL files. One of the sample programs from the training course is open, and you can see its contents in an editor pane. To compile and run this program, you can right-click on the name of the JCL file that corresponds with the program name. Here's what the JCL looks like. Without going far into the weeds, I can say the first step, labeled cod run, invokes a cataloged procedure, or proc, that contains boilerplate JCL to compile and link a Cobol program. The second step, labeled step 2, executes the program that was just compiled, if no errors were encountered. There is a proc that runs all 3 steps, but in this case, the people who set up the training course decided to separate the compile and link from the execution. That isn't really significant. You can set things up in different ways. To submit the job, we right-click on the name of the JCL file, and that opens a context menu. You can see some of the one of the options is Submit Job. Choosing this option is the same as typing SUB in the Ispf panel that submits jobs. There are several other options that are relevant to working on mainframe systems. Notice the menu options refer to a member. That's because these files are stored in partitioned data sets, or PDSs, on the mainframe. A PDS is a type of data set that functions as a library. The individual files in a PDS are called members. When the tool downloads files, it organizes them hierarchically in a way that resembles directories and files on most other systems. After the job runs, the tool downloads the output files that are generated by the job entry subsystem, the Cobol compiler, the linker, and the program itself. All these tool stacks work in a similar way. They provide an interface to the mainframe that looks and feels a little more normal than the bare bones TSO Ispf interface. They also provide an editor that knows something about the language and can give you feedback that you don't get from a basic editor. Okay, mainframe modernization. IBM is focused on hardware engineering and operating system enhancement. You can see those steps, 1, 2, 3, 4, and the last one there really has to do with how people work, and that's very new for the mainframe people. With respect to software development, delivery, and support practices, improvements in the mainframe world have taken the opposite course from improvements in the rest of the world. And when I say that, it's my observation. It's not anyone's official position. For what it's worth, my observation is that in the mainframe world, improvements started with operations, DevOps, and deployment, and they worked their way backwards along the delivery pipeline. In the rest of the world, improvements started with programming, design, and unit testing, and progressed forward along the delivery pipeline. Improved practices in continuous integration, trunk-based development, test automation, and application packaging came next. DevOps and automated deployment came after that, and today, the next horizon for improvement is in operations, with proactive production monitoring based on observability. I think the difference in the direction of improvement reflects general priorities in the two worlds. The focus of mainframers' thinking has been the production environment and maintaining stability in existing systems. That's where the business risk is and where the largest costs are. Given the kinds of organizations mainframes support, this focus makes perfect sense. Meanwhile, in the rest of the world, we've been interested in creating new apps quickly. We can throw an app together in no time using frameworks like Rails and React. People have focused on speed during development, even elevating the use of keyboard shortcuts into a veritable art form. It's because we've been creating end user apps for mobile and web environments, where we have to dazzle people with creative user interfaces and give them something new almost every day. This difference in direction has had an influence on the tools available for programming and testing. Tools that support mainframe programming and testing are mature toward the end of the delivery pipeline and less mature toward the beginning of the pipeline. The opposite is true, generally speaking, for development tools targeting other platforms. In the mainframe world, many organizations are currently focusing on test automation. They're only now starting to become aware of technical practices at the front end of the delivery pipeline. In the rest of the world, many organizations are also focusing on test automation. But technical practices at the front of the pipeline are pretty well known, and tools to support those practices are well established. So test automation might be the point where the two worlds are passing each other on their respective paths to improvement. It's the other end of the pipeline where things are still new. We're learning about observability and using observability-based tools in production, rather than depending on logs and after-the-fact problem resolution. These are solved problems in the mainframe world. Here's a popular model for depicting different levels of test automation, known as the test automation pyramid or triangle. Mainframe facilities and third-party products are available for all levels of test automation except the base of the pyramid, unit testing. Mainframers will talk about unit testing, but in fact, the smallest unit of code that can be executed in isolation is an entire executable. Until now, there's no way to exercise individual Cobol paragraphs without running parts of the code not of direct interest to the test case, and without touching external resources such as files. The second issue is that test-first development is all but unknown in the mainframe world. When discussing it with mainframers and with people who develop testing tools for mainframe programmers, I have found they generally don't grasp the concept at first, and for the most part, they have never considered it. That means, as you might imagine, that the testing tools they have built cannot easily support practices like test-driven development and incremental refactoring. The tools enhance 20th century developer workflows, but they make 21st century developer workflows difficult. That's where the open source project Cobalt Check comes in. Its goal is to enable Cobol developers to write fine-grained examples in the nature of microtests, conceptually at the same level of detail as the unit test cases we write for languages like Python, Ruby, C#, Go, JavaScript, etc. We want to be able to work locally while we are working at the unit level so we can enjoy very short feedback loops and run our unit test cases many times while we work in red-green refactor cycles. Traditional mainframe languages are not designed to enable runtime inspection or modification on the fly. To enable fine-grained unit testing, Cobalt Check copies the program under test and inserts test code into it based on a domain-specific language, or DSL, for expressing unit test cases. Then the copy of the program is executed, and the inserted test code performs just the paragraphs mentioned in the test cases and does not run the entire program. Here's what test cases can look like. The unit testing DSL is designed to be intuitive for Cobol programmers, not necessarily for C# or Python programmers or anyone else. This example is checking the functionality of a Cobol paragraph that looks up a US state name based on its postal abbreviation. The unique capability Cobalt Check brings in comparison with other mainframe testing tools is the ability to exercise a single paragraph in isolation from external dependencies. That gives us the ability to work with microtests in the sense G. Paul Hill defines the term, isolated in the way Michael Feathers has recommended. So, would you like to see this thing? Anybody want to see it? Nobody wants to see it?
We're trying to hit the unmute button.
Yeah. Yeah, I always do that too. I can never find the unmute button. Okay.
If you hit the space bar on your keyboard, you don't have to hit the unmute button.
Space bar, okay.
That is true.
Now all I have to do now is remember that. That's the hard part. So did this screen share work properly? Can you see my VS Code thing now? Or did it not change?
Oh. Yep, we see.
Oh, you see this one? Okay, let me stop and start it again. I don't know why it does that, but it seems to like to do that. This must be this one. And share again.
Now we can see it.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, so what Cobalt check looks like. Here's a couple of sample programs here. Let's look at this one. Here's some test cases. And you can see it looks like that DSL that I was showing you. So we can exercise a Cobalt program one paragraph at a time this way. Here's the program that this is exercising isn't very interesting. It doesn't do anything. It just has fields. It's really for testing the tool. But we can at least see what it looks like. It's a standalone Java program.
Dave, are you doing Cobol and VS Code?
Yes.
That's the only ID I ever need now.
Well, yeah, it's got a lot of great extensions for lots of languages, and it's got some very good ones for Cobol. In fact, this whole setup with the Zoe Explorer is all based on VS Code. Okay, so it looks like that when it runs. That has run 51 test cases. You saw it took about a second. It's a little slower than, you know, a Ruby or something, but it's a lot faster than going back and forth to the mainframe for every test case. So it's a pretty good improvement, I think. So this is the kind of output you get. You get, so where's the top of it? It echoes the test suite name, and the test case names are echoed in the pass or fail messages. When it fails, it shows what was expected and what it got. So it's pretty much like other tools you've seen, the tools that you normally use. Trying to bring this same sort of working experience to Cobalt people. So we could do some TDD with this, or FizzBuzz thing, or whatever. I don't know if you want to.
That sounds interesting.
Sure.
You want to do that?
Absolutely.
Okay. Well, I'll be the driver, and that way I don't have to think. You guys can be navigators. That sounds fair to me.
Now, does that mean because you're an expert in Cobol that we can declare our intention at the level of intent and you can execute on it?
Yes, you can do that. And for those who are not familiar with mob programming, that's a key part of it he just described. So you can also subtitle this mob programming. Right. Okay, and Kim doesn't know it yet, but she's going to be one of the navigators here in a couple of minutes. So let's, the way this tool expects the test cases to be under a directory. So I'm going to create that directory and a test file. And you can have multiple test files under each program's directory, so you can organize the test cases in some rational way. The language is a little different from things like C# and Java, so we have to accommodate that. All right, let's say this is a classic exercise. I'll put the classics never die. This FizzBuzz is a classic. Okay, a test case. All right, let's say Camille wanted to do this so she can be the first navigator. What's our first test case, Camille?
Okay, well, let's take the simplest one. If I get an input of 1, it should return a string of 1. Say an
Okay.
integer should be 1, and what I should get is I should get one as a character or string, however it works in the system.
Okay, how about that?
Probably a string because we're going to need things that are bigger than that. Yeah, a string.
Okay. So let's say, now we don't have any code yet, so we can imagine what it might look like. The
Oh.
way to do this in Cobol would be, we're going to move a value to a field. We're going to move a 1 to, I'm going to call it WS initial value. The reason for calling it that is it's going to go in an area of the program that's called the working storage section. So for a dose of reality, some of these programs that you might work with can approach 100,000 lines. They're really big. So people use naming conventions to try to organize the contents of the source file in some way. So many people will put a prefix for each section of the program so they know where to go look for the variables. So I'm putting WS on here to stand for working storage, and we'll see that when we write some code. Okay, so that's the
Cobol convention for good naming conventions, right?
well, naming conventions apply to every language, of course.
And this is Cobal's.
Yeah, this is a language, so yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so you remember the format of a test case, right? It's arrange, act, assert. So this is the arrange part.
Action, post condition. All the
Yeah.
same stuff.
Precondition
Even when
also,
then.
yeah. Exactly, yeah. So we're given a 1, we expect to see a 1. And
What
there will be
variable?
something that we run. I'm going to call it, what do we want to call it?
Oh, okay. So this will be
Carbonate, I'll say perform carbonate.
carbonate.
Why not? It makes bubbles, fizz.
Oh, okay.
All right.
All right, now so far, these statements are just plain COBOL statements, except for test case and test suite. But the DSL is more about the assertions.
Mm-hmm.
So we're gonna expect, let's say,
Going to be in a
Call it
different working
result.
storage. Okay, working storage result.
to be, let's say,
Yeah, so working storage has the input value and the result.
yes. Now, if you're not familiar with COBOL, there's no scope. All of the storage, all of the memory for the program is all one chunk. Okay, there's no stack, there's no heap, there's no variables. They call them variables, but they're actually fields. You know what a field really is a range of memory addresses. And that's what you have with COBOL. So you'll see that in a second. And it's funny that in Java, they use the word field to mean an instance member that holds data. And that's really a variable. So it's funny. In Cobol, they call the fields variables. In Java, they call variables fields. Well, I don't know. Sometimes I get hung up on words. But anyway, if we were to run this, of course it'll blow up
Navigator
because there's no
It
program.
should fail. So let's run it.
You want it to fail? Yeah, of course you want
Yeah,
it to fail.
it should fail.
So,
A question for Navigator Camille.
Yeah.
I believe the usual rule of thumb for FizzBuzz is to entertain the numbers from 1 to 100.
That is true.
I'm looking at line 6 and wondering about that last number.
Why is it a 0, 1? That's a good question. I assume that's a COBOL thing.
I might be thinking too far ahead. So
Oh,
I shouldn't be
okay.
thinking at all as the driver. So I'll just say
Right.
1.
Yeah, it's supposed to be a string, so why should it have a 0 in front of it?
Right. Well, one reason, Camille, is that there's no strings.
There's no strings in COBOL. There's what?
Well,
Series
this
of
is,
characters?
remember the slide that had all the questions and the answers and the confused guy? Because of the POSIX Unix functionality that they added,
Mhm.
there are strings.
Okay,
But in traditional COBOL, there's no strings.
and we're working with traditional COBOL here
Yes,
because that is our target audience.
that's the target audience, yeah. And I think this is where most of the job opportunities are for COBOL, is maintaining the legacy systems. But they are modernizing everything on the mainframe, including the languages.
Okay,
So my vague recollection is that the WS dash whatever is working storage, and it
Uh-huh.
is an allocation of a certain amount of memory at a certain address. And I
Right.
have a feeling that 1 takes less memory space than 001 or 100.
Okay, let's find out. So you guys are TDD practitioners. What's the quickest way to find something out like that?
Write a test.
Okay, I think we have one. All right.
How do we
All
know
right.
what we're looking at here?
Well, down at the bottom here, at this Cobalt check has emitted this error message. It was not able to create a reader for a program called FizzBuzz.
Well, and we haven't created a data division for it to have any working storage in either.
Well, there is no program called FizzBuzz.
Oh, well, okay.
Not yet.
Yes.
And that's the
right.
whole driven
Yeah.
part.
That's right. And
Uh-huh.
if you remember, your other languages are not always very friendly about this either. If you remember
Oh, no.
what you get out of Ruby if you don't have a class, you get some cryptic message, and when you're not familiar with Ruby, it really doesn't help you much. So this one probably doesn't help too much until you get used to it. But
Mhm.
what all that really means is there's no such program. It can't find that program.
Oh, that's what it says. Cobalt check terminating, attempting to load config from blah, blah, blah.
This one down here that starts with exception.
Exception down there. Okay. In thread main, blah, 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 possible logic error, driver caught IO exception to create reader for program under test FizzBuzz. Yep. Okay.
So there's some
Perfect.
attempt
Me.
to help you with some long messages here.
I
I
haven't
don't know
used
how.
Cobol since the 80s
Mhm.
and not a lot at that.
And
Okay,
tonight's your first exposure to Neopragma Cobalt check.
that's right. Yeah. Well, it is kind of a new thing. All right. Well, let's replicate the same
So
structure.
now we need a
here.
program.
Now we're up here under, you know how, that directory structure, source, main, Java, source, test, Java. I'm using the same structure here. So that we're up in source, main, Cobol now.
Okay.
And we have a folder, and we're going to put a file in it. We can call it Ispf CBL for Cobol.
For Cobol. Okay.
Okay. So now I wonder what the test will do now.
Well, it'll give us a different error.
It gives us a different error. What do you know?
Let's run it and find out what new error it gives us.
Well, there it is.
So
There.
Dave,
Section.
you've got this VS Code plugin, I should say plugin to VS Code specifically for Cobol. Will it
Mhm.
generate a canned template that has all the usual paragraphs or sections, as I recall? My God,
There's
it's been a
4 of
long
them, as I
time.
remember.
Well, let's find out. What's the quickest way to find out? I keep asking
Assume
you
that
that,
the
you know
navigator, assume that the navigator actually knows how to use the tool.
Oh, look, it has code completion.
There we go. Excellent.
That's part of the
Okay,
IBM
identification
Z
division. There
Cobol.
should be one of those.
Oh,
Yep,
God.
There's
everybody
one.
wants one of those.
Got one of
The
those.
memories.
Okay.
You need a program ID.
Uh-huh.
Be FizzBuzz.
Okay.
Yeah,
So
probably
now-
all we need there. Then that second division that you almost remember is called environment division.
Environment division.
And that connects external resources with the program. But we
Right.
don't have that.
We don't
at
have
this
any.
point. So we're going to
We don't
skip
need one?
that. We don't need that. We do
Oh.
need a data division.
Yes, we do. We've got working storage.
That's where working storage goes, right?
Right. I've
Okay.
written a Cobol program that didn't have a.
I'm going to do this funny looking thing because the convention nowadays is to start working storage with an O1 level. And I don't want to go into weeds, but that causes boundary alignment in memory.
Okay.
So they're going to deprecate, or they have deprecated 77 level items. So that's going to go away.
Whatever you said there.
Okay, well, back in the 80s, you would have known what that was.
I don't remember what 7.
Now you don't need to know anymore.
Vaguely, I sort of remember that. Yeah, this is a
Brain
long
hurts
time
already.
ago. Okay.
Okay, so
And
I'm
now
gonna
we
make
have to know
this,
what type it is, right?
this is that initial value that was mentioned in the test
Right.
case.
So that's,
I'm gonna make it 2 digits because somebody remembered that it goes up to 100. We can make it 3 if you want, just in case. I don't think we'll get that far today,
right.
but, you know.
Okay.
And we can have
We need our,
result, I think it was called, right?
yeah, and
Result, and that might be a number.
maybe bigger.
And let's just leave it at that. We'll make it
Okay,
'Cause
that'll
I
that'll at
don't,
least,
go ahead, we'll
that'll
do the
still have
minimum.
errors, but it'll get different errors.
Okay, so for an alphanumeric item, which is what you're trying to get to with a
That's
string,
it,
right?
right.
It's gonna be, I'll make that a couple of characters long. So if this is, if you were to look at the object code that this generates from offset 0 from working storage for a length of 3, that's what this label WS initial value represents.
Uh-huh.
It does not actually represent a thing that is protected from having non-numeric values put into it. It's not protected at runtime. This is just a compiler hint.
Says pre-strongly typed languages.
This, I would say that it has no type system.
All right, yes, you can do arithmetic on this.
You can try to do anything. You can put any garbage in memory if you mess with it. So that's only starting to change a little with Cobol, Enterprise Cobol 6.3, where the compiler actually can tell if you are referencing a variable that has not been initialized and things like that.
Well,
Up until, that's like today. I mean, up until like this year, the Cobol compiler really didn't do anything to protect the data division areas at runtime.
Because that would be very
Today-
un-Cobol-like.
we have
Mhm.
enough to get a different error now. It's probably going to complain we don't have a procedure division now.
Yeah, it won't compile without that, but let's put one in.
Oh, you're going to put it in now? I was thinking.
Might as well.
Okay,
We'll just say, we'll just end it. Now, there's a lot of ways to end, a couple of ways to end statements. I usually put a period on a separate line, but there's an older style where you put periods all over the place. That's not my favorite, but it's okay.
okay.
Still valid. Okay. Well, that doesn't change the scope of the variables or the fields. That's just source code that you can insert. So, if you have something common like a record layout or something like that, you can
That
insert
might
that.
be analogous to something like an import statement in Java.
Yes.
Basically sucking
Yeah.
something in from an external file.
Well, an import statement in some languages, so not Java. I don't know of an equivalent in Java, really.
There are some languages where you can stick it inside the middle of your code wherever you want it.
Yeah.
Um,
And this language is like
programs
that.
do that.
Yeah,
Okay.
I just think of them as namespaces because they create data boundary for my variables. So when I use different copybooks, they have different defined variables in them. I
Mhm.
kind of equate that to a namespace just because
Well-
it's a boundary for my variables.
I can see conceptually it would be, but it's not implemented that way. You end up with just a big chunk of memory. But that's okay. As long as you know that, then you won't cause runtime errors.
Well, we should have a different failure. at
All
this
right,
point.
let's see what we got. Oh,
4 test cases were
why
executed.
did that happen? Oh, that must be cache from when I was playing with it before.
Yeah, leftover.
Yeah, that's not good.
That's not what we want. It's
No, it's not.
executing the wrong test.
Let's see, what directory does that go in? Oh, okay. Just gonna remove that. I think this should work now.
What?
Okay, yeah, all I did was remove the executable from the last time.
Oh, okay.
It was left over. Okay. Now it's finding,
Can't find carbonate.
no, can't
That
find
is there isn't
carbonate.
one.
The equivalent
Right.
of you have no such method.
Uh-huh.
Exactly, yes. You have no such method. That's
Mhm.
right. So paragraphs, we're talking about conceptual boundaries and things. Paragraphs are conceptually similar to Java methods, but they are not implemented the same way. So because Cobol is a procedural language, it's not an object-oriented language.
Mhm.
But conceptually, that's the piece that we want to get to for unit testing.
Smallest
So-
logical piece.
Yeah, so let's say we have a program that will perform carbonate,
Carbonate?
and then it'll go out. Okay, so we need a paragraph called carbonate. Okay, now we're also following a convention here where some of this stuff starts in column 8, some starts in column 12. You might have noticed that.
Mm-hmm.
So with traditional COBOL, there are areas in the line that have special meaning. And the extension for VS Code here is put vertical lines there to help us remember where those are. So paragraphs has to start in column 8, and then the regular statements have to start in 12. But in
By
modern
recollection,
COBOL,
those are zones.
no, well, areas, they call them areas. So
Areas.
column 8, that's area A, this is area B. The same idea. But if you were just writing COBOL to run on your Windows machine or something, you could write free form.
So the simplest thing that could possibly work here is that we ignore what we've just stuck in WS initial value, and we just put the I'll call it a string because that's what my brain is working of 1 into VS.
So
WS
you'd
result.
move an O1 to the WS dash result.
Yeah, something like that.
Very good.
Very good. Your memory's better than mine.
Well, we can switch navigators too. Let's
Yeah,
see.
it's probably, if we get it running, it's definitely time to switch.
Okay, it passed. I guess we can ship.
Well, it doesn't do much yet.
Not yet.
But that's always the case with the first test.
That's always the
Yeah.
case with about the
It's-
first 5 tests.
It's schlock code, but it works. That's the whole point.
Yeah. So Ben really looks like he should be the next navigator. He just navigator written on his forehead.
Did I hear my name?
You did. So what do we do next, Ben?
What's our next test?
See how it responds with 2.
2. Okay. Okay, you guys look away while I copy and paste.
So Ben, would you be open to a second class of number that produces something other than itself in the form of a string? Because that's kind of boring. That's more of the same. How about something like some number that might produce fizz?
Well, it's, whoops, you
We don't have
have,
to worry about that until we get to 3, do we?
there's
Mm.
an error in line 9 on the test.
Okay. Yeah, it
Yeah.
looks like it wants to see a 0 in front of the number.
No, the not 9, 11 may be a problem, but on line 9,
Oh, yes, that's moving a 1, not a 2, isn't it?
yep.
Very good. So this is why I shouldn't copy and paste. So I
Mm,
did that on purpose as a
Okay.
learning point for you.
Teaching.
You're
point.
welcome. Yeah, it was a teaching point. Yeah, that's it. Anybody asks, that's what happened. Okay.
Yeah, right.
Okay. All right, 1 passed,
One failed.
and it looks like it failed for the right reason. Okay. So who was that who was suggesting a different course of action here?
That
A
was
different
Bob.
That would
Who was
be,
it? Bob?
yes.
All right, you want to navigate for one? I don't
Wait a
think
minute,
we're going to sit.
you gotta
Well, we
Failing
got a
test.
failing test. We have to get to
fix
green.
that.
Oh, okay. Okay, so Ben, what do we do to get to green? Let me get the program back up here so you can see it. Okay. So right now we have this code, move 01 to result.
Well, to make the second one pass, you could change that to move 02.
And what
the
would that
first
do to
one
the first
failed.
one?
That would
It would
fail.
make it fail.
Mhm.
So the objective is to get 2 successful tests, not one or the other.
Oh, gee, that complicates things.
It
Yeah.
does, yeah.
You'd have to look at WS initial value and
Yeah,
return an 01 or 02.
Depending.
Return, I say, move based on that.
So like something like this.
is there a way to convert that into a string?
Isn't actually a nice way. So we're gonna have to play some Cobol games here to make that happen. So this is what they call a group item.
So
Which
who's
is
our researcher role in this mob?
What's this?
Who's our researcher role in this mob? to research
Ah.
how to convert integers to strings.
You could go and research it. I don't know how long you want to stay here. But
Point taken.
yeah, okay, so we can say, put a couple of digits there and that should be good enough. And then
Oh, and then you're
some
gonna
more,
another
give it
version.
some more space for, because we're gonna have to put words in there pretty soon. Like, I think it's fizz buzz is 8 characters, isn't it? So we can do that.
Yep.
All right, so we could do this, because this won't compile this way. The compiler will say, you have picture X and you're moving it to picture 9. This is not kosher. So we could do that. That should look like an O1 or an O2. Let's see if it does. Okay, it kind of like that. Okay. Bob, you want to go next?
Sure. Let
Okay.
me, there, now I won't have to hold down the space key. So we're going to continue to drive this, but we're going to take it in a new direction to force some new behavior. Would you please create a test case for it returns fizz when the input is 6?
Okay.
Because I like the pattern you've got going here in the name. And I'm operating on the assumption that that's sufficient for you to execute on.
It seems to be.
Okay.
That look okay to you?
That's what I had in mind. Thank you. Let's
Okay.
run that, and it should run as a fail with 2 successful tests and 1 failing. And sure enough, pass, pass, fail.
And that's the right failure, I think, too.
Yep.
Okay.
So now you're better equipped than I to figure out what one will need to do. I noticed that, for instance, on line 9, you created a placeholder for a string of up to 6 digits, right?
Well, the
Or
reason
up to
what that means is if I refer to this name, WS results, it will
right?
pick up these 8 bytes.
I'm not sure how we're going to keep it happy with the first 2 tests. And first of
Well-
all, an if statement is what comes to mind. And the cheapest, stupidest thing we could possibly do is an if statement that says, if I get this exact value, I will push into WS result this exact expected answer.
I like that because I like it when, if we know the code isn't really right, we have to think of the right test cases to drive out the right code rather than thinking ahead. And I think you and I are on the same page with that.
Okay. So amazeballs, there's an if statement.
How about that? You never know. It's almost a programming language with if statements and all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, like in English.
Yeah?
And indenting and everything.
Yep. It sure is. That it doesn't care how far you indent. It's not Python. It's not going to line up.
Yeah, thanks for that.
Well, if you indent past, what is it, like 80 characters or something, and you're set to compile that cutoff?
No, look out
Yes.
at 72 because that's for your
72,
sequence
yeah.
numbers. Yeah.
Unless you're doing free form Cobol, which is not for mainframes, but then you can go up to like 514, I think.
Actually, that's where
419.
I did Cobol was deck Cobol, and it could be freeform.
Yeah. Not much market for programmers for DEC anymore.
That is true.
Oops, what did I just do? I didn't do anything. It tried to help me. Sometimes I don't like editors helping quite as much as they do.
Yes. So I approve of what it is that I see you've done. That let's see if we can get that to work just as it is.
Okay.
I suspect that this will be 3 green test.
Let's see if it is. And it is.
Look at that.
Okay. Kim,
So, So
Are
we
you
will adopt
comfortable doing the next
rotate on
one?
green?
Yeah, let's
Not at all in the slightest. But if
No?
you provide some guidance, no, this
Yeah,
is,
okay,
I'm
well-
multilingual, but computer is not one of my languages.
Okay, well, the other guys seem to know what FizzBuzz is already. The idea is if you get a number in that's evenly divisible by 3, the program should output fizz. And otherwise, it just repeats the number.
So we
So
can
that's
use
just one.
12 in this, 24, 21. We're good
Yeah.
there.
Right. So there's
So that's the
basically
idea.
4 classes of outcome. Some
Okay.
numbers should produce fizz because they are a multiple of 3,
3, and other ones will not.
and other numbers will produce buzz because they are a multiple of 5, and some will produce fizz buzz because they're a multiple of both 3 and 5.
So 15's our jam over here. Is what I'm
Yeah,
hearing.
exactly.
go.
Well, we want to sneak up on that because we're doing test-driven development. So we're going to sneak up on it one little thing at a time. So
Exactly.
what would be the next thing that you see that's wrong about this code that we would want to fix by thinking of the right test?
I'd like to defer to a smarter candidate than I for this role.
Well, if it's 6, it's going to return fizz, but it really should return fizz for any number that is evenly divisible by 3, right?
So actually, can we take a look at the test? Because I think we may have a pattern that we want to play off of.
Okay.
We have 2 examples of things that will just return the number, but as a string. That was our starting pattern. Then we switched to a second class of numbers, and we've only got 1 example, which is making our code very lazy. So maybe a second example that forces the same behavior, but with a different number that meets the criteria, like 12 or some other multiple of 3. In fact, maybe even the largest possible within our designated range from 1 to 100 that meets that criteria. What would that number be that is a multiple of 3 but is less than 100?
I think you're still on the hook, Kim.
I can't be on the hook, guys. What number is a multiple of 3 but less than 100? Is that the
Correct.
confirmed question? Bob, I thought you were saving me here. 9, 12, 15, 18, 21, 24, 27. You want all
Count down
multiples
from
of 3?
100.
99, 96,
There you go. So
99.
80,
okay.
90.
if we were to adopt a pattern of the smallest number and the largest number,
In the chain.
or like that, that would be a nice convenient pattern that it would be easy to detect that we've got this covered with multiple examples.
Bob, you're killing me here.
99.
So
The input's
you already
99.
said the number.
So the input is 99. I will be honest
Yeah.
with every one of you on this call. I speak 4 languages: Hindi, Russian, English, and Spanish. But Cobol is way
But
beyond.
this
my
isn't
not
even a language thing. This is a math thing. It's
Yeah.
what's the smallest? Okay.
Maybe you're just a little nervous because you're surrounded
be.
by programmers and everything.
I'm on the
Okay.
spot.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's okay. It's all fun.
You are surrounded by people supporting you.
Yes, yes. We're all friends.
Yeah, I don't consent to that. I'm not showing up and helping anybody here roof their house or bury bodies.
Okay, what do we have then? Okay, we've got 3 passing. The old ones are passing. The new one is not passing. So that's basically what we want, isn't it?
Yeah, this is very intentionally designed to force new, better behavior.
Mhm.
That's the objective.
And I see something funny here. The result is 99ZZ. I think that
is
this
funny.
field has leftover data.
Oh my goodness, it does, doesn't it?
So I think the first, I know I'm not the navigator, but I think the first thing we're going to do is clear out that result field here.
What an
Well,
excellent idea.
we people who haven't written Cobol in forever or at all don't remember that was necessary.
Oh, it is, because nothing happens automatically in memory here.
Okay.
These are not objects in memory. It's just a range
Yep.
of memory addresses. So one of the numerous ways in which we can,
that you move, or is it just we use a different version of Cobol?
could be. And mainframe Cobol, if you don't clear out the memory, it still has whatever was in it by chance.
I think a fun invented game would be to create a pretend computer with Legos or something, and then you could see just how manual it would be.
Yeah. Well, you work on that for the next meeting. That'll be good. Okay, so we have the failure we want, I think. So I guess you're going to defer to the Cobol guy to figure out how to do that. So rather than wasting time, we'll just do that. Okay. We don't really want to check for a 6, right? We want to see if this is evenly divisible by 3. So you're just going to love how verbose this is, but we're going to have more fields. Like,
Are you going to actually have a remainder field?
yep,
I
Okay.
saw it coming.
yep, that's right. Well, welcome to the 80s. Yeah. So Cobalt check is kind of funny because it's written in the second most verbose language to support unit testing in the most verbose language. So if you're a Perl programmer, you would really hate this.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, Yvonne.
Why?
Giving. We don't care about the quotient, but we have to put it in there.
You got to store it someplace, so why not call it quotient?
Remainder.
I mean, it won't compile without that.
Okay, now you
Okay,
can do
now
that.
we can say,
Now you can do the check on remainder.
right,
0. Okay.
that.
Kim,
Oh, you know, I'll
Making
put
sense
these
for
notes,
you.
not the right.
You're dividing some number by some other number.
Mm-hmm.
And if the remainder value is 0, that means that that division was an
Well, it's
equal
working.
division. So there
Yeah,
was
divisor, using 3 as the divisor, right?
Yeah.
right.
Right.
So you
So I
see,
do understand basic math. That's fine.
Right.
It's just typing it in the order and you're putting it is fascinating. Because I
Mhm.
had zero concept of like, oh, no. One guy was like, oh, we need the remainder as Dave was typing remainder. And I was like, oh shit. Like I
Right.
was not prepared for that aspect of life.
Right. So all of these lines are the modulo operator.
yeah,
And that's
Yeah.
why these programs are so long. Everything takes, I mean, it's meant to look kind of like English.
Mm-hmm.
It only looks enough like English to confuse people.
Well, there was initially a German and a French version as well.
Hmm.
Yeah, except when Grace Hopper showed that to the admirals, they could believe that a computer could understand English, but not French and German, and that put the project back a few years.
Oh, wow. That's a good story.
You didn't know that one. Yep.
I didn't. No, I didn't know that. I know you can you can change the language of Cucumber, but I've never seen anyone actually do it.
oh, I've done that. That's a blast. I once wrote 2 feature files and only 1 step definition, one in Portuguese and one in English. And the step definition used the magic of regex to process both languages. And
Yeah, that's the kind of magic that I don't like to inherit when I'm supporting a system. But thanks a lot for, I see that who to blame now. Okay, we've got through our first 4. Good job, Kim. You want to do any more of this, or do you feel like you have a sense of what this tool is about?
Yeah, I'm okay to move on. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll move on and stop and start to share again, I guess. There's not much left that I have. I think
So
that's the
the
right one.
functionality or the concepts that we have demonstrated in Cobol
Mhm.
is the ability to replicate the modulo operator programmatically.
Sort of. Yeah.
Well, it does it.
Yeah. Yeah. But we can have
And
our discussion. I guess I'll move on to that
Yeah.
slide.
Yeah,
perfect.
so-
Carefully crafted artwork here. Yeah, I think what we really were trying to show was that it is possible to have a TDD workflow for Cobol with the addition of a tool that lets us break out the paragraphs like that. Because otherwise you'd be going to TSO and submitting a job, running the entire program. If it had files, you'd have to fake out the files when all you were trying to look for was, is it going to return fizz for the number 6? And it would take several minutes for each round of red, green refactor, which is not a very smooth workflow, right? So what we want to do with Cobalt Check is enable Cobalt programmers, mainframe programmers, to enjoy the same sort of workflow that we're used to. So what did you guys think of this? Was there any new information in this presentation for you at all? Or what do you think of mainframes now?
Agreed.
Yeah,
Technically, you didn't even need to talk about mainframes because you're doing it in VS Code.
That's true, but really the audience for it is mainframe programmers who are going to
Get it.
support legacy applications, because that is kind of an important area. These applications play a big role in the global economy, and the people who understand them are retiring. They're too old. They can't keep working on this. So some new people have to be willing to pick it up.
Mhm.
And giving the background about mainframe modernization kind of relates to that, because people need some reason to take this as a career choice. They don't want to go, well, I'm going to support old code on a dead platform. That's not really a career option that you would choose, right? So to understand where IBM is taking this platform might make it look a little more attractive, because it's going to be, you still have all the Java stuff. It's still running Linux. It's running Linux, it's running KVM, it runs Docker. I mean, it's all modernized, but you also have the other side of this with the legacy stuff. So it could be a good career move for a young person. This might be their way to get in the door on this platform.
And I would think, from the point of view of a relatively new young developer, one of the attractive things would be those retiring COBOL programmers, they're making good money. And if you can step into those shoes, why wouldn't you? Because you can also do the real stuff the stuff you really want to do, because it's really running Linux under the covers.
Well,
So
not
you
under the
have both.
covers, in a different LPAR.
In a different LPAR. My mistake. Yes.
Yeah.
But the point being, you can have them both.
Yes, you can. You can work on both. And really, that one slide I had with the 3 different clouds, you've all done, well, most of you, I guess, have done Spring Boot with Java, going to an application server like WebSphere. Well, that's the environment. That's one of the environments. It's all familiar stuff. Now, if you go to the CICS environment, you can also use Spring Boot. There's some differences in the annotations and different jars that you use, but you can use CICS as a service backend, and that gives you access to all the legacy data sets and databases. So there's some interesting and fun stuff that you can do on this platform. Well, I think that's fun anyway. Combining the old and the new like that is a very interesting challenge.
You ever play with .NET Cobol?
No, I've heard of it, but I haven't tried it.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. So you can compile your Cobol into unmanaged code. You can also do managed .NET Cobol. So then you can start doing object-oriented with Cobol, which gets, like, you want to talk about verbose Cobol, like how it's already verbose. It gets very verbose with the object-oriented to it.
Yes, it does.
Fujitsu did that back in the 80s.
Yeah, Cobol does have object-oriented features, but if you're working on the legacy applications, you probably won't see that because they were not really used much. But yeah, it has a little of everything they've thrown in over the years. So just to make it extra confusing.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Was that unit platform, that unit testing platform, do you need to be running on that the IBM mainframe to
Oh,
use
the
that? Or
whole,
can you run that?
that's really one of the points too, is to be able to run independently of the mainframe. So you don't have all the overhead of having to submit jobs over and over.
You
So
could
this was
literally
running
be
on,
running that in a coffee shop on your laptop, right?
yeah, I was running that, we were playing with a VM running Linux Mint, and the host is a MacBook Pro. So yeah, you could, that's part of the idea of Cobalt Check, is that you can download your code and then play with it a lot. Because if you think about that test automation pyramid, we spend probably 70 to 90% of our time at the bottom of it, at the unit level. And we don't really need files and databases and all that stuff for that, because we're exercising the logic of the program in isolation, little pieces. So it just makes sense to me to spend most of our time on a platform that gives us fast turnaround, fast feedback. And when we're ready to do integration testing and things like that, we can upload it and run it on the mainframe. But there's no reason to stay connected all the time and have everything slow. I just don't get that. Maybe I'm just impatient.
No, I'm run into the same thing with everything being slow for folks developing Android because they have to be connected to the main system all the time. And it's 20-minute builds.
Yeah, how do you do
Yeah.
TDD with a 20-minute delay? You know, it's not
I
practical.
run Spirodex in between. It's really awful.
Yikes.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
There's not emulators? Come on.
So you're still in the process, of my understanding, of enhancing the Cobalt check. What are you adding to it next?
Well, we can go over to the, well, where am I? Go to the GitHub project and see. This is a rewrite of Cobol unit test, which some of you played with before. I think Camille had played with that when we were at a client together.
Mm-hmm.
Let me see if I can get out of this into that. Find, yeah, okay.
I was having problems with it running on my Mac. Sounds like you've got a better solution for that now.
On the Mac?
Yeah.
Yeah, this runs on the Mac pretty well. 'Cause the original one was actually written in Cobol. And that turned out to be not such a great idea. You know how sometimes you do something and then later you think, well, it seemed like a good idea at the time.
Oh, often.
Because I figured, well, if you can compile this, then you can use it on whatever platform, but it's really tedious
Yeah.
to do this kind of thing in Cobol. It's not the type of problem that the language was meant for. So kind of what we're planning.
Why don't you stick that into the chat?
What a great idea.
This link? Sure,
Yeah.
sure.
To the
I'm also going to send the deck, which has links in it.
Cool.
So let's see. Should be common test case pattern. Okay. So I've kind of notated this. We're thinking of this 010 release maybe for March, and it'll do all these basic things, right? Just like we just saw. That's about it.
Uh-huh.
Right. And then next, we're going to start adding support for mocks. So it turns out there's a company in Denmark that actually was using Cobol unit test, and they forked it because they had to make a lot of changes to it to make it work for them. And they have it now built into their CI pipeline.
Cool.
So their commits will fail. I mean, not their commits, but their builds will fail if all their tests don't pass. So they're a little ahead of where we are now on the rewrite. They're also on the team because they're the only people who have used what we call it the proof of concept now, but they're the only ones who have used that. And they have a lot of feedback about how to do mocks because it was pretty crude implementation. So I'm glad to have that. I think that's the next version is going to have support for mocks, at least some, probably
Mhm.
batch programs. So it would look something like this. You could say mock a paragraph, for instance, and you can
Okay.
put COBOL statements in there that's what
Uh-huh.
it's going to do instead of actually doing the paragraph.
Okay, got it.
So it would be that. So it's very similar to other kind of mock tools,
Okay,
right? And that's another example of mocking a call, mocking a batch read, a CICS read would look something like this. So you mock the data set
mm-hmm,
and you tell it, well, whatever operations you're going to do on that data set, you want to do this instead. Right?
mm-hmm.
So it will not call CICS. So that you can run those tests off the platform on Windows or Linux or something on your laptop, because it's not really going to try to interact with CICS. It's going to, it'll comment that out and it'll substitute these lines instead. So that's next, probably next release. And we don't have a schedule,
Mm-hmm.
and you know, different kinds of mocks here. And later I was thinking what we don't have in the proof of concept is the like a parameterized test case like that.
Mm-hmm.
So this probably looks a little similar to JUnit 5 kind of stuff. So in the patterns, like Bob was noticing, the patterns we had for FizzBuzz, you could do this kind of a thing. That'll be a future release too.
Okay,
I want to know
sounds cool.
when you're gonna have Gherkin ready for it.
You're not the first person to suggest that, but I'm
not
resistant to
surprised.
that because Gherkin is
It's-
typically for a different audience than unit testing.
Yeah,
Yes. Oh, but you can misuse any framework.
That's true, you could. And you know, there's something else that a lesson learned, or I take it as an object lesson. Do you ever work with Kotlin?
I know of it. I haven't worked with it.
Oh, okay. Well, there's an open source unit testing framework for it called CoTest. And they have 10 different formats for unit tests. So one thing that I want to do with Cobalt check is keep it pretty focused, you know, and not have, I want people to have options that where it makes sense to have options. But if you have 10 different formats, that's just confusing, you know. And the next programmer to come along maybe is not used to the format that you use and they have trouble understanding the tests, trouble reusing the tests just because there's just too many variations.
So that's not like having an asserts library where there's multiple ways to call assert throws, asserts equals, assert not so-and-so, or like.
Yeah, that would be
press.
similar to that, but it's really boils down to syntactic sugar, in my opinion.
Okay.
So yeah, you might say you, and I can imagine two programmers arguing about whether they like, you know, should we use a behavioral type assertion, or should we use a, you know, a JUnit type assertion, or should we use a fluent assertion? And to me, they're arguing about things that are very minor, and they're making big long discussions out of something that's not very. It doesn't make that much difference, right?
Right.
You have more fundamental things to work on first.
Well, yeah, first and I hope last, but I'm not the only person on this anymore. So
Well, that's cool.
So there will be other opinions coming in here, and that's good. So they might decide they like that kind of stuff, and that'll be the way it goes. But I don't know yet. It's not just my toy anymore. Now it's a real project. It has a team. It's being managed under the Open Mainframe project. And so it's got some governance around it. So it may turn into something. We'll see.
So Dave, from what I understood you to say earlier about what people can and cannot or have more difficulty getting their head around, is that the way that IBM has set up ZOS and that is that basically you can do Cobol and you can do pretty much anything you can do on a Linux system, including containers. You can do it all, and you can do it in the mainframe as if it was a big old fat cloud.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But my understanding of what you've said is that's sort of a mental barrier. People can't get their head around that reality.
I think what people have trouble getting their head around is that it's all one system. How can it be Linux and also Docker and also Unix and also ZOS and also TPF all at the same time? That doesn't make sense to them.
And be fast.
And be fast, yeah.
Yeah.
And secure. I mean, it has a security module for encryption for cryptographic device. If you tried to take that out of the machine and steal it, it would self-destruct like something out of the movies.
Cool.
I mean, it's really a very capable system. It's way beyond anything you can buy at Best Buy. And it's very hard. It's hard to describe it, you know, because it's got so many different aspects to it.
Well, it's expensive. One would have hoped that it would be good.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, and this is not the sort of thing you could afford to buy if you're looking for things that are affordable at Best Buy.
Yeah,
Another category.
that's true. Yeah.
You know, it's why in the early days we didn't have computers unless we kind of soldered them together ourselves
True. Yeah.
because they were too bloody expensive.
Mhm.
Hey Dave, I'm gonna cut off the stream here. I'm gonna leave the Zoom open, but just to wrap up the stream, can you kind of give some more information on how people might contact you if they have questions following this presentation?
I guess they can use my email or something like that. You want me to put that in the chat? Would that help?
Sure, yeah.
Okay. Well, somebody already put the link to Cobalt. Check. Okay.
All right, and then I'll.
There's that.
Thanks for presenting. That was really interesting. I'm excited to learn more, and I'm gonna go fork your repo, I think, and play around with it.
Yeah, that would be great.
All right, we're
Yeah.
off streaming now. So
Okay. Thanks, Dave. Thanks a lot.
yeah, that was really
Well, I hope it was useful.
Very.
It was to me. Thank you. I'm new. My first time with the group. And actually, my son recommended I join. I think he's a member, maybe not here, but I'm in Richmond, Virginia, and one of my clients is a state of or Commonwealth of Virginia, and work with them a lot on their mainframe migrations and some of their other items. So I'm more of a high level. I'm not a programmer, but this was really interesting to me and gave me some more insight. Thank you.
Great. I'm glad it was useful.
Thank you.
Interesting. The only other Del Grosso I know is actually in Munich.
German.
That's my son.
Ah, say hello to Nicholas.
That's Nick. Yeah, Nick DeGrosso.
Yeah.
He lives out there on. Yep.
I'm glad you were able to join.
Yeah, he's introducing me to mob programming. I'm a consultant with a firm here, and I'm looking at the
In that case, let me put a link into the chat that you might be interested in on Sunday this weekend. You can learn a lot about mob programming in one day.
Ooh.
And Camille will be there too.
Yes, I will be.
Oh, thank you.
So
Super.
pull that up.
Are you guys hosting it?
Yeah, it's free. It's online. I don't need a sponsor because it's just whoever signs up. I'm going to put the Eventbrite link in so that anyone can register for it. Meetup. Here we are. Upcoming winter copy.
Is that the winter retreat or is it a different event?
Yeah,
That's
it's
the
the winter
one.
retreat. That's why I've got the
Okay.
background at the moment.
And Camille has agreed to be one of my helpers because we expect we might get a few people. Well, we haven't got as many as I had hoped for, but this is really sort of a setup for